If you caught part 1 of this Final Fantasy IX series, you'll know that Nobuo Uematsu is undisputedly the king of vibes. He is an expert at using very deliberate decisions of texture, instrumentation, harmony, and everything else at his disposal to craft the perfect atmosphere for whatever the game calls for. And these vibes seep out of each of his pieces right from the very first note. In the first video, I focused mostly on musical texture, but there are tons of other subtle details that go into creating a musical vibe. So many that it can be difficult to figure out how each element of the music is precisely responsible for the feeling that the music creates. So in the second and final part of this series, we'll be looking at the theme of the game's main antagonist, Kuja, and dig deep into the different techniques Uematsu uses to create vibes. The track titled Kuja's Theme presents the material in a very different way from the other iterations of Kuja's theme on the soundtrack. First, let's take a listen and see what words come to mind that you'd use to describe the tune's vibe. The whole piece continues on this pattern of 3-note arpeggio figures in both hands of the piano, and I think I'd describe it as playfully dark, maybe a little bit mysterious as well. There's definitely a darkness to the piece, but it's a little bit whimsical too. It's much easier to describe something as vague as a vibe in comparison to something else. So, let's compare Kuja's theme to Wicked Melody, the arrangement of his theme that appears when Kuja asks main character Zidane for a favor at his desert palace. Once again, listen and think about what words come to mind to describe the vibe of this piece, especially in comparison to what we heard earlier. I'd say this piece is more somber, more ominous, and maybe a little angrier. In any case, it sounds very different from the first iteration that we played, to the point that some of you may not have even recognized the two as being the same theme. I know I didn't catch it right away. Wicked Melody's quarter-note melody in a slow 4/4 time is the typical way that Kuja's theme appears in the various pieces it pops up in throughout the soundtrack, but the track actually titled Kuja's Theme is scored in a sprightly 6/8 for solo piano, with each melody note filled in with these downward arpeggios. Looking at the top note of each arpeggio in the right hand of the piano part, you'll see Kuja's melody, a frankly genius figure that winds chromatically around the 5th of our tonic minor chord, in this case, D minor. This figure is perfect. It's simple, super recognizable, and it has the quality that all great themes have, where it just seems obvious, as if its being written was totally inevitable. Afterwards, we start on our 5th and walk down a D minor arpeggio to get to a B flat, setting up a resolution to the 5th an octave below where we started, only to get faked out by landing a half step below where we expect, harmonized as the 5th of the minor chord a half step below our tonic. This same melodic structure is a little more easily visible in its less cluttered 4/4 time variation, now starting in the key of E minor. This 9-note melody is the first of 2 core ideas that define the villain's theme, and the second is that of the sudden shift to an out-of-key minor triad that closes off the phrase. After the initial melodic idea is established, Kuja's theme continues through a series of jarring shifts to different minor triads, moving by half-step, by tritone, and a healthy helping of chromatic medians to get from one chord to the most jarring following chord possible. There are a few stretches of chords that would fit into one key together here and there, but they seem to serve mostly to get the listener to relax their guard, leading up to another dissonant dive out of key. Having the harmony built entirely out of minor triads contributes heavily to the darkness felt on each version of Kuja's theme throughout the soundtrack, and this erratic harmonic movement seems to accentuate the villain's chaotic and nefarious nature. Wherever the harmony ends up, the melody follows, taking the original melodic idea and starting it on the fifth of whatever chord we happen to be on at the time. Sometimes the phrase ends off with an upward arpeggio, sometimes downward, but each time it ends on a sour note by landing on the flat fifth of whatever the previous minor chord was as we shift to a jarring new tonal center. The other iterations of Kuja's theme throughout the soundtrack all share the same jarring harmonic pattern and the same melody, so what is it that accounts for the differences in vibe between them? Going back to Wicked Melody, we have the exact same harmony and melody as Kuja's theme, so where did the sense of playfulness go? To my ears, we went from committing atrocities with a grin to with a scowl. Well, there are three key factors at play here: the rhythm, the orchestration, and the approach to voicing each chord. Wicked Melody's much slower tempo and less active rhythm play a huge part in its difference in vibe. Compared to the constant barrage of triplet arpeggios, the held whole note chords carry a lot less rhythmic energy than Kuja's theme. On top of that, the orchestral color of strings mixed with choir and piano seems to carry a little more emotional weight than these single note solo piano lines. But along with that, the chords are voiced in a much more serious way in Wicked Melody. Each minor triad is presented in a closed voicing with a heavy bass note played in octaves below, and each shift from chord to chord comes with the smoothest possible voice leading. The jarring shift between tonalities is softened somewhat by the efficient movement from one chord to the next. By comparison, Kuja's theme structures each chord in an open fashion, oftentimes with a root fifth, root third structure, though when there's space in the melody, we'll get a more colorful root fifth, third, fourth kind of thing going on. This structure is then moved around to start on the root of each minor chord with no real consideration for smoothness, accentuating the dissonance of each jump in tonality. You might think that using smoother voice leading would make the piece sound less dissonant, and in a sense it does, but it also seems to me to give the piece a sense that it's taking itself more seriously. Leaning into jagged chromatic dissonances like this can often sound a little bit silly. I covered this concept more broadly in my video about Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door soundtrack a while back, and I think this approach does make Kuja's piano theme sound less serious than its peers. Of course, the change in approach to voicing structures alone wouldn't necessarily change Wicked Melody's vibe from nihilistic to mischievous, but all of the little factors work together to push the tune in one direction or the other. Straight whole note pads versus quicker 6/8 arpeggios, closed smooth voice leading versus open jarring chord voicings, and the solo piano orchestration against a fuller, darker ensemble sound, plus We Will Rock You drum beat. If each of these details push the vibe 5% in one specific direction, then all of them working together can have a massive effect on the tone of the music. It's having the control and awareness of these little details and what they provide to the music that makes Uematsu the king of vibes. For a massive shift in vibes, let's take a look at how Kuja's theme felt 4 games prior in Final Fantasy V's desert theme, Slumber of Ancient Earth. That's right, Uematsu reused this desert melody for Kuja's theme as one of many musical references to past Final Fantasy games throughout the Final Fantasy IX soundtrack. Kuja's desert home suits the use of this desert theme, but it's really interesting to hear how it was changed from its original incarnation. The main theme here plays out over a static tonic B minor chord, and hearing this theme for the first time after becoming familiar with Kuja's theme, it was so interesting to hear that both the chromatic winding around the fifth at the beginning as well as the flat fifth fake out at the end of the phrase were originally conceived of as not chromatic at all, but derived from what's sometimes called the Hungarian minor scale. The scale takes a harmonic minor scale with a raised seventh and adds in a sharp fourth as well. Any scale with an augmented second is going to sound desert-y in that kind of classic old Hollywood sense, but this scale is funny because it also gives us 3 chromatic notes in a row, the sharp 4 to 5 to flat 6, all diatonic to the scale. Uematsu clearly was playing around with this fact when he based the melody off of these 3 notes. This transforms Kuja's theme from being just a great theme to being a genius reinterpretation of a great theme. The vibe was changed so drastically from Final Fantasy V's original to Final Fantasy IX that, hearing Kuja's themes first, you'd never ever guess in a million years that it was conceived of as an exotic desert-flavored piece. Getting rid of the tonic chord drone was the first step. The sharp fourth fake out at the end of the phrase originally resolved playfully up to the fifth of the chord after a bar, but dropping the harmony down instead to make this sharp fourth the fifth of the new chord was just inspired. Back to Final Fantasy IX, I want to take a look at a couple more iterations of Kuja's theme and assess their vibes. Devil's Ambition takes the same slow 4/4 approach we saw in Wicked Melody, but it feels more light and inquisitive. Listen for a bit and see what you think. I wouldn't say that it feels playful in the way that the original piano theme does, but it's certainly a little more mysterious, perhaps even suspicious. Definitely less ominous and angry than Wicked Melody. There's one more element to vibe creation that I want to explore here, and that's the art of the introduction. The art of the introduction. Intros are incredibly important for setting the tone of a piece of music, and the context that the intro brings to the main thematic material can make a huge difference on how you perceive that material. Let's compare Devil's Ambition to Wicked Melody. Wicked Melody starts with this ominous organ intro, and as everyone knows, organs are very spoopy. No, but actually, both for reasons of timbre and cultural association, the trope of grand, ominous organ chords is pretty much universally accepted. But more importantly than that, we set up a really interesting harmonic context for the main theme once it comes in. We start in F minor and fool around there for a few bars before resolving up to this A-flat minor chord. Not only does this chromatic mediant jump from F minor to A-flat minor foreshadow the harmonic movements that will come to define the main section of the piece, we also jump from this A-flat minor chord down a major third to start the melody suddenly on an E minor chord once the main theme comes in. This means that we're coming into the melody with a sudden, jarring chromatic shift, which immediately colors how we experience the first bars of the theme. This context works together with all of the other details we discussed earlier to give the sense that Kuja is a bad dude, not to be messed with, and he is fuming. By contrast, Devil's Ambition, which plays during several Kuja scenes throughout the game, starts with this little chromatic embellishment of the fifth of a C minor chord in the high strings, with the melody doubled by Glockenspiel, answered by this pizzicato arpeggio up a C minor chord. This dip down from the 5 to the sharp 4 back up to the 5 foreshadows the core melodic idea of the main theme, but the much higher range of the orchestration feels much less ominous than the previous organ intro. Like said organ intro, Devil's Ambition's intro moves to an A-flat minor chord to transition to the main theme, but we bridge the gap between C minor and A-flat minor with an A-flat major chord in between. This softens the movement, as C minor to A-flat is a standard minor key move, and A-flat to A-flat minor isn't nearly as jarring of a shift as a chromatic mediant jump would be. Furthermore, this A-flat minor resolves down to start our melody in the key of E-flat minor, giving us a nice solid minor chord minor 1 resolution to kick off the main theme, rather than a sudden leap to a very distant tonality. Our expectations are set wildly differently by these two intros, and that completely changes how we perceive the exact same thematic material that follows. This effect is augmented by the differences in orchestral texture. The thick choral pads, low piano bass notes, and powerful drum beat, all of these things work together to create a heaviness in Wicked Melody. Devil's Ambition has much less low end, with light pizzicato string stabs ducking in occasionally to ground the music with a bass note here and there. And the chords are played not as full triads, but arpeggiated by a harp, which has a much lighter and gentler tone than Wicked Melody's choir and piano combo. Once again, it's a confluence of several factors working together that make up a tune's vibe, and a good intro can guide our expectations so that each of these little details hits just a little harder when the main theme comes in. Uematsu is truly a master of nuance and subtlety when it comes to these small details in the music, but in case you're sick of subtlety, let's take a listen to The Darkness of Eternity, Kuja's final boss theme. Like many of his other final boss themes, Uematsu went all out with a classic driving rock group orchestration, complete with mad organ shredding. Sometimes vibes are just a matter of using the conventions of a particular genre. So, let's all enjoy the vibes of Uematsu's The Darkness of Eternity to close out the video. Come on, how could I finish this video without including that, huh? There are a lot of things that can affect vibes, from orchestration to rhythmic arrangement to chord voicings to harmony to intros to genre conventions. There are so many different factors that it's impossible to analyze a piece of music fully, taking every aspect of it into account. The only way that all of that information could be processed at once is just by listening to the music and feeling the vibes for yourself. Thank you all so much for coming along with me on this two-part Final Fantasy IX journey. I hope Uematsu's vibes resonated with you as much as they did with me. Huge thanks to patrons Orgamecha and James Michael Sellers for requesting I take a look at Final Fantasy IX in the first place. You can join them on my Patreon if you'd like to support the channel. $5 and up patrons get access to all of the transcriptions I make for these videos, including a metric butt ton of Final Fantasy IX transcriptions. So if that interests you, feel free to go on over to my Patreon here. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.